Good morning. Welcome to Coffee with Dr. Childress on a Sunday morning. Today I'm going to be um, talking at things at sort of a meta level. I kind of see it as inviting you into the officer's tent to kind of look at the overall lay of the battlefield um, to help you orient, hopefully, to the situation. The In thinking about what to talk about, I know that a lot of parents are desperate for information about how to stabilize your child, how to recover your child, but that's not actually possible because it requires the mental health people. That's our job, and we're failing in our job. And I've been telling you all about our failures over the last couple of weeks. But when we fail in our job, that forces you, the parent, to then step up, and you have to figure out what to do in the situation. But that's not your role, and you're not uh, in a place where you can do that. You're being invalidated by the pathology, your perspective, and we really need the mental health people to come in and diagnose the child abuse, and they're not. So, um, the, just to tell you a little story here, I met Dorsey Pruder about 2014. She came up and introduced herself and showed me the high road protocol, and I recognized how it would work and how it is successful. And so I began to support her and her work in the family courts. But Dorsey, or Ann Dorsey, has a mindset of each individual family. So she's always been out for each individual family, trying to recover them. From my perspective, though, I see a systems failure, broader system, and we cannot solve it for any one family or any one child until we solve it for everybody, until we fix the broken systems. So we've been on different tracks to the same purpose. Which so she's working individual families one at a time, and I'm working more the systems level to try to fix the systems, and that's what I'll be want to talk about today. But we've reached a point now in time where now I'm also on the individual cases one by one. So I'm doing consulting work and meeting the forensic psychologists in the playground of the family courts, um, which is I anticipate we'll be creating some things. Uh, and so for you, the families, the parents, I know you're desperate to recover your children, but if I tell you ways that you could potentially find your child and get the child to rebond back into you, your child's going to face a withering psychological retaliation from the pathological parent. This is child abuse, and the child will be psychologically abused if they join with you or bond with you. The other parent, the pathological parent, has set up sides in the family, and so the child has to choose sides. And they know if they choose or if they don't choose the pathological parent, they know that that's going to create all sorts of problems for them with that parent. And they don't know it up here, they know it kind of in their heart. Um, just from living with them, you live with that parent. And so they know that's going to be a problem. And they also are more, they, the child understands that you're going to be okay. You're the stronger, you're the healthier parent, and this other parent needs them more. And so that's another kind of hard understanding that they collapse back in. And then what Dorsey realizes is also true, which is that the targeted parent, are actually the chosen parent. The child is giving you the problem because the child realizes that you can solve it. And they're giving you the best problem they can possibly give you, the biggest, most flamboyant problem, to call attention to the nature of their distress and the pathology that they're facing, the challenges that they're facing. unfortunately, the mental health people are so immensely ignorant and incompetent that they just miss the overall communications of the child, and miss the pathology and miss everything. They misdiagnose it, and they wind up treating cancer with insulin, and the patient dies from the misdiagnosed and mistreated cancer. So I'm not going to open the child up to psychological abuse until we can first protect the child. So that's the first issue. Diagnosis guides treatment. And the diagnosis in this case is child psychological abuse. And so the first step is to protect the child. Once we protect the child, then we can recover the child. But we don't go into a treatment plan before for dangerous pathology, suicide, homicide, or abuse until we can first protect the child. We go into a safety plan first for any of those dangerous pathologies. Now, in this, we have various factions over here, various aspects of the pathology, but fundamentally, the issue is it's immensely dangerous to practice in the family courts for a psychologist. And so there's a risk management response has been taken within professional psychology to address the high risks of working in the family courts, the high risk to us, our license. And the several risk management. One is the clinical psychologists have fled, so they don't work over here because it's too dangerous. And instead, they've given you your own special psychologists, we call them forensic psychologists, and they are the worst imaginable. But part of the reason they're the worst imaginable is we've given them within the profession carte blanche to do whatever they need to protect themselves, because we know it's narcissistic borderline personality pathology over here, very dangerous, very vengeful, very retaliatory, delusionally psychotic. So if a licensing board complaint comes in against a forensic psychologist or around child custody, it's referred over to other forensic psychologists. It's considered a subspecialty practice, and they review themselves and they exempt themselves from any ethical standards or any standard, because they will face the same thing. They're forensic psychologists. Now they're on the licensing board, but before they were and after, they're still doing their forensic evaluations. So they don't want to face this retaliation from the pathology. And so they basically just exempt themselves. And so the quality of professional practice has just gone to the bottom, because no clinical psychologists, no people with the knowledge, they didn't work all their careers and education and years of supervised training just to get their license, to put it on the risk, on the line, and danger in the family courts. The courts are dangerous. They have opposing counsel whose sole purpose is to discredit your testimony and in any way possible, including slander, including going after your license and stuff, or setting you up for that. So if you don't know how to testify in the family courts, it's dangerous. And so clinical psychologists go away. So the court is also complicit. The legal system is also complicit in driving the quality of professional practices to the bottom. If you threaten the license of the psychologist, they won't come here, which is what has happened. And instead, you get these forensic psychologists who put on this big bomb disposal custody evaluation that solves nothing. One of the problems that forensic psychology faces as they've come over here is they've given, in order to be different than clinical psychology, they gave up their power. And their power is in diagnosis, identifying what the problem is. And when you diagnose child abuse, then that's a powerful diagnosis. But they don't diagnose anything, and they don't do that on purpose, because they're kind of thought disordered. And when they do that, they don't have any power to change things, but that's not their purpose. And I'll be talking about Saul and Simon going forward, forensic psychology, but there's Stahl and Simon in their book, Forensic Psychology in Child Custody Litigation. They talk about their purpose of a forensic evaluation is not to solve anything. They're little mini judges who opine on custody, which is not the role of doctors. And so I'm bringing back clinical psychology, which is diagnosis and identifying what the pathology is. Now, when I do that, when I say that's a narcissistic dark personality and shared delusion and all, that I'm interrupting and disrupting the ability, the pathology to get its needs met. And so that's going to be retaliatory. They're going to come after my license. So I faced multiple licensing board complaints since coming over into the family courts. I've never faced one prior to that. Not one, never. Prior to that, I come over to the family courts. I'm facing multiple not ethics complaints, board complaints. Most of them are kind of low level. None of them have been substantiated except Oregon, but I'm in appeal on that. And which raises another question, or another dangerous thing for clinical psychologists is Oregon is the licensing board, the forensic psychologists, because they control, they're coming and retaliating against me because I exposed their ignorance. My report in that matter for the custody resolution method wasn't used in any litigation. First off, it's no problem with it. Second, it wasn't used in any litigation. The only use of it was to support a licensing board complaint against the involved forensic psychologists because they directly refused to assess for possible child abuse. They said, no, I'm not assessing for it. And then the custody resolution method data comes back with my report saying, the data says this could be possible child abuse and you need a proper risk assessment for child abuse. Parent files a board complaint, said, look, the data said, and they were refusing. And so the only injured party in Oregon was the forensic psychologist who had a board complaint filed. The licensing board didn't investigate the psychologist. Instead, they sanctioned me for being in Oregon without a license. I'm not in Oregon. I'm in California with Dorsey Pruder. I'm consulting to Dorsey. My client wasn't in Oregon. That's Dorsey's client. But that's all under appeal. But it raises another issue for the clinical people. And we know this. If we come over here and don't do what the forensic psychologists do, then we will face retaliation from the forensic licensing board because we're not doing a forensic psychology. So we got a dangerous pathology, we got a dangerous legal system with opposing counsel and having to testify, and we got a dangerous licensing board. So there's no clinical psychologists over here, which is why things are at the bottom. The treatment for this pathology will be court-adapted dialectic behavior therapy. Dialectic behavior therapy needs to get over here. It needs a little bit of adaptation to the family courts. It's been around for 30 years. Why hasn't it been incorporated or involved over here? Because no clinical psychologists are over here. You don't have even any treatment. So I knew all this back in 2008. After I started to look at the situation when I first got introduced to what was happening here. I have background, my master's degree in community psychology. So I did a little workup of which is what you're supposed to do, of kind of what's the status, what's the problem here. And I did all my research on parental alienation and forensic psychology and kind of figured it out, which wasn't hard. The ethical standards are at the bottom. They're not competent. 2.01, they're not applying knowledge, 2.04. And because of that, their opinions are not based on information and techniques sufficient to substantiate their findings, 9.01. Now, knowing that about 10 years ago, I set on a path to alter the systems. And the way I'm doing that is, and the way to think about me is I'm a fulcrum. So I'm the knowledge of professional psychology, and I'm kind of sitting in one spot applying the knowledge, and that allows you, the parents, to kind of get your lever in there and start leveraging the changes that need to happen. So, you know, to activate the APA Ethics Code 2.01, 2.04, we have to define the pathology within established constructs and principles so that we can hold them accountable, the forensic psychologists accountable. We can't hold them accountable to a parental alienation. That's the problem. We can't hold them accountable to parental alienation. Now, I've told you for 10 years, stop using that term, parental alienation. There's people still out there using it. Um, and if you're at this point, if you're a parent using the term parental alienation, there's nothing I can do for you. Bye. I'm just going to wash you aside and you're headed to your destruction. I'm going to work with the other parents who are motivated to actually solve things. Because if you're using the term parental alienation, you're just lazy, and you're looking for somebody to rescue you, and you're not adopting into your role that you need to rescue your child. But you want to be part of some sort of movement and have everybody understand how victimized you are. No, you need to be empowered, and which is what I've done. I've given you the knowledge that you need to empower yourself. So this pathology at a meta level, this pathology has a proto mind almost. It's a set of damaged information structures in the attachment networks. Actually, they were kind of right here. And uh, it, it's a motivational system. The attachment system is a motivational system. So this pathology has access to the person's motivations. So it moves with kind of a motivational intent, to protect itself and to actualize the pathology. And it finds like minds that have a similar damage, and they kind of all glom together. I kind of think of it like a slime mold where you get individual cells, but they all kind of come together and form a larger entity. And that's a lot of what we have over here. Technical term would be countertransference. Um, but um, we have the the pathology um, incorporates other allies. It has three defenses. It hides. That's a sex abuse pathogen. It hides extremely well. It recruits allies to help actualize itself. And they're getting their vicarious trauma needs met through their narrative about being a child protection person or something. And it attacks with great viciousness. If you threaten to expose it, it comes at you and attacks, which all you've experienced. And as a psychologist, those attacks are very professionally dangerous, because for a variety of reasons, the forensic psychologist can retaliate against you, or there could be some technical issue that then you get sanctioned for something other than that. It's just, and you have to hire an attorney. You go to your malpractice insurance and hire an attorney for the. It's really stressful for psychologists to get licensing board complaints. Not to mention malpractice lawsuits. Oh, that's just a whole different level of potential danger. And so that's what the pathology, this motivation, kind of proto motivation, that's what it's designed to do, is to make it so dangerous for anybody that's trying to help you that they won't help you. And so you've got forensic psychologists now who they will not challenge the pathology. They will not diagnose the child abuse. They will not say this parent, because if they do, they're going to face retaliation from that parent. Whereas if they just don't change anything and just don't solve anything, then the targeted parent can't retaliate because there's no grounds for that. There's, you did something wrong, and it goes into the ethics licensing board, and the licensing board just throws it right away because they all do the same thing and they're all in danger. That's how they've chosen to protect themselves, is by exempting themselves from standards of practice and just saying, well, it's just because of what we work with. That's not how we should be protecting ourselves. And we need, as a professional field, after 40 years of this experiment with forensic custody evaluations, it's a failed model of service delivery. It was a bad approach to managing the risk of the pathology. And so what I've done, it needs to be revisited, our approach to how we deal with that. We need to get clinical psychology back, to working with these families, treatment, not custody. And so what I've done is I've moved away from parental alienation. I anchored us into established knowledge. And what that does is activate standard 2.04 and 2.01 of the APA ethics code. The moment I define it within the constructs of shared delusional disorder, the attachment system, family systems therapy, that now activates standard 2.04. And if they don't know all of that necessary domains of knowledge, that activates 2.01. And between the both of those are going to activate 9.01, a basis of assessment. Their recommendations as contained in their reports, evaluative statements, and forensic testimony are not based on information and techniques sufficient to substantiate their findings. 2.04. The and so once I did that, and I did that with Foundations, the book. Once I did that, then now we can hold the forensic psychologists accountable, under the APA ethics code. You can't hold them accountable with parental alienation. You can once we define it within established constructs. So the moment that I do that, the dominoes are going to be falling. But I had to, because I know I'm going to reach this point, maybe not all the way to this point. I was hoping that they would be smarter and kind of take the off ramp at some point, to their destruction, but they're not. We're driving straight into their destruction. And so knowing that I was going to reach this point of being in the family courts as a testifying expert witness, I've been sort of setting the stage, because everybody's going to be looking back. And once we acknowledge, the mental health professionals acknowledge that this is child abuse, child psychological abuse, that means that they've missed that diagnosis for the past 40 years. They've missed the shared persecutory delusion. They've been participating in it because they've been believing it for the past 40 years. And so I have to kind of show in my path that I did the proper steps. I did the proper things. I told the AFCC about it in 2017. I introduced them to Dorsey and said, here's somebody who knows how to solve things. I did it again with the petition to the APA. Said, here's the problem. And they gave it over to a committee of forensic psychologists to death by committee. So I've documented into place that they are not motivated to solve the pathology, and they're not motivated to abide by ethical standards. And so what's going to happen at some point is, because I'm in the family courts, the number one issue for the judge is my credibility. And it's going to be, is Dr. Childress's work supported by the other mental health professionals in the field? Okay, that's going to be the central question for the courts. And yes, it is, because there's nothing Dr. Childress about this pathology. I did that on purpose. So there's Bowlby, Mnuchin, Beck, and all the research literature on shared delusions and all the DSM, APA, all of that. And so, yes, it is. But the other thing that provokes is that the opposing counsel is going to try to find somebody who's going to argue with that. But when they start to try to do that, that highlights the fact that no, there's no argument with that. Bowlby says what he says. Milan says what he says. Beck says this is established knowledge. There is no argument about that. And that's right now I'm in the the place where getting introduced to the judges in the court system. But within a year or two, I'm going to become a known commodity because I always do the same thing. Comes out of just working with brains. You want to develop a rhythm to things. So I've got my rhythm down. I always say the same thing. It's, you've seen my recent post just last couple days. With severe attachment pathology, the differential diagnosis is child abuse by one parent or the other. Either it's child abuse by the targeted parent, creating the attachment pathology towards that parent, a two-person attribution of causality, or it's child abuse by the allied parent who's creating a shared persecutory delusion and false attachment pathology in the child for secondary gain. That's a three-person attribution of causality. So is it two-person or is it a three-person? And that's your differential diagnosis. But one way or the other, it's possible child abuse, and we need to get a proper risk assessment. So I'm going to be saying that forever, and that's true. It's a true statement. And so once the mental health people move out of their lethargy, these forensic psychologists, they're going to have to look at Dr. Childress's what I'm saying, and what I'm saying is true. Now, the pathogen, the damaged information, to see how it's responding to that issue is you can look at the Gardner PAS experts because they're part of the pathology. They're a symptom feature of the pathology. And so you can look at how they addressed Dr. Childress, which is just to completely ignore because the moment they look, they have to acknowledge it's true. The moment they acknowledge it's true, it's all over. Example, Bill Burnett. He's a psychiatrist, not a psychologist. He has no background in attachment. He has no background in family systems. He has background in delusional thought disorders. He's a psychiatrist. In the DSM-4 TR, which he used up until 2013, there was a diagnosis, shared psychotic disorder, shared persecutory delusion. He never diagnosed it. I can pretty much guarantee he never diagnosed a shared psychotic disorder. In the entire time he was practicing from 1980s up until 2013 in the DSM-5, how many times did he diagnose a shared delusional disorder? Whoosh. So the moment he acknowledges that it is a shared delusion, that Dr. Childress is right, that means he's been incompetent for 40 years. All of the forensic people are going to find that. All the forensic psychologists, all these custody evaluators who've been around for 20, 30, 40 years with their big puffy vitas, their vitas are so thin, they haven't worked with ADHD, oppositional defiant disorder, trauma disorder, even child therapy in other settings. It's been strictly forensic custody evaluations, and they think that protects them because they're such experts in forensic. No, that doesn't protect you from 2.04 and 2.01. You have to be competent in attachment if you're assessing attachment pathology, delusional thought disorders if you're assessing delusional thought, family systems if you're assessing a family, complex trauma, child abuse if you're assessing, and they're not. And so the moment people start attending to Dr. Childress and what I'm saying, it's right. It's absolutely 100% right, everything I'm saying. And that they're going to have to address it. And they're going to have to address their unethical practice on 3 standards, 2.01, 2.04, and 9.01. What that does is it all of a sudden, all the long-time forensic evaluators, forensic psychologists lose all credibility. The only ones that are of any worth are the relatively new ones here who haven't been misdiagnosing the pathology for very long, but they all face the same competence issues. And they have to testify in court, and potentially the targeted parent, when they mess up on their custody evaluation, is going to bring me that custody evaluation for a second opinion consult. and I'm going to do my thing line by line, checklist of applied knowledge, and then my summary and analysis report that is basically always saying the same thing. Did they apply knowledge 2.04? Do they know the knowledge? Let's look at their Vita 2.01. And then no, they didn't. No, they didn't. Um, and so that's 9.01 violation. So those are your three ethics standards. Now, what that does is it makes you, the targeted parent or the chosen parent, it makes you professionally dangerous to the forensic custody evaluator. With parental alienation or before, you're not dangerous to them. They just blow you off if you file a licensing board complaint. But now, when you file a licensing board complaint against them for a violation of 2.04 and 2.01 and 9.01, that's credible. You have credible support for that. They didn't apply the knowledge. You can use a checklist of applied knowledge. It's up on my website, in the attorney section. You can apply that yourself. Did they use any of these words? No, they didn't. Now it's a little better when I do because I know the concepts, but yeah, you can do that and put them on the defensive, make them justify that they did do that. And they failed in their duty to protect child abuse, the not competent and delusional thought disorders. Now, the delusional thought disorders is kind of interesting because the pathogen disrespects me. It underestimated Dr. Childress. Some of that was it was focused over on Dorsey because she solves it, and so it wanted to destroy her big time. But she survived. She made it through, but it didn't attend to me as much. It tried to get me into conflict and tried to get me off, and I didn't go. I didn't bite on the bait. The But what that means is I got under the radar here for a long time. And so now I'm in the family courts and they're going to have to testify. And potentially any one of their clients who is dissatisfied with them because they didn't apply knowledge and they didn't, do a proper risk assessment. And what's the diagnosis of, shared delusion? Did they miss it? And all this kind of stuff. Any one of the parents can get that over to me potentially for a review. And oh my goodness, if you're a psychologist, you do not want Dr. Childress grading your paper if you're ignorant and incompetent and unethical. So I've shifted around the risk of the risk management. I have now made targeted parents as dangerous to the allies of the pathology, the forensic psychologists, as the pathology is to your allies, which have driven all your clinical psychology people away. Those would be your allies, ones who diagnose and treat pathology. And so that's a part of what's going to be happening here. So as part of that, I would recommend that all parents who encounter these ignorant, incompetent, and unethical forensic psychologists who do not apply knowledge and who did not conduct a proper risk assessment and may not be competent in the assessment and diagnosis of delusional thought disorders and didn't consult or try to do anything about that, that you file licensing board complaints against them for violation of 2.04. That's the first one. Bases of their judgments. They didn't apply any knowledge from attachment, family systems, delusional thought disorders, complex trauma, checklist of applied knowledge. So 2.04. And the reason they didn't apply any knowledge is they don't know it. That's 2.01. That's their Vita. You can look at their Vita and say, where did you get the experience on assessing delusional thought disorders and those sorts of things? And you can bring this up in their testimony as well. Your attorneys can, which will make them very uncomfortable and squirm. And potentially, my goal when I'm on a case with around the testimony, their testimony, is to get them to admit through in their testimony that they were in violation of various ethical standards. Because it's so much easier to get the board complaint and malpractice lawsuit when they have admitted under oath that they've. And so, holy cow, that's how dangerous this field is. These forensic psychologists who think they're all safe with their custody evaluations are now in danger of potentially sanctions on their license or losing their license. It is incredibly dangerous to work over here. The change is it's just not, it's no longer only dangerous to Dr. Childress and your allies, it's now dangerous to the pathogen's allies as well for being so ignorant and incompetent. Now, I'm not recommending that you file board complaints frivolously or out of revenge motivations, or they made the wrong decision. Licensing boards don't care about whether or not they made the wrong decision. They care about what standards were broken, what violations to practice standards. So that's what I've given you is those standards: 2.04, 2.01, 9.01, and fail in their duty to protect on 2 counts. Fail to protect the child from child abuse, fail to protect the spouse from spousal psychological abuse using the child as a weapon. Make the forensic psychologists defend themselves on those allegations. If parents start producing those licensing board complaints into the licensing board, what's that going to do? It's going to educate the forensic psychologists on the licensing board about their failures. And it's true. So while Oregon retaliated against Dr. Childress and said, get out, not all the licensing boards will do that. Some, they'll start to go, holy cow, I'm at risk because the next evaluation I do, that could come to Dr. Childress and he's going to do the same report on me because it's the same thing. And once you can't unsee things again. And so it's dealing with their motivation. They are lazy as all get out. When I encounter forensic psychologists, this is my personal professional to them. If you don't know as much as Dr. Childress about this pathology, why not? What are you, just lazy? I know it. You just must be lazy. Or is it that you don't think that professional knowledge applies to what you do because you're just doing something unprofessional? So tell me, what is it? Are you either lazy or you just don't think knowledge applies to making your decisions and judgments? I'd love to have that answer on a cross-examination. And so that's why I say I'm not the ceiling. I'm not an expert. I'm the floor. I'm your baseline. These forensic psychologists need to know at least as much as Dr. Childress. So they need to get going on that. Otherwise, they're going to face a review from me and it could be kind of tough for them going forward. So when warranted, don't frivolous revenge kind of thing, but when warranted, start filing the licensing board complaints because it's the right thing to do. In California, we have an obligation when we get a client who was potentially sex abused by another therapist, the sex with a client thing, and we learn about that. We're not allowed to break confidentiality on that. However, we are required to educate the client about the nature of the violation from the other psychologist, as well as provide them with a book. There's a booklet that licensing board gives us to say, here's a booklet about this, and you can do licensing, and we're supposed to educate them. And I have obligations under standards 1.04 and 1.05 when I run into ethical violations by psychologists. And 1.04, informal notification. I can't informally notify everybody, and it's not going to be solved that way because they're not motivated to do anything. I've been here for 10 years. I can document they're not motivated. So that activates 1.05 for me, that I have to take additional steps appropriate to the situation, additional actions. This is it. I'm educating the consumers about your rights under the APA ethics code and your rights under applied knowledge, and I'm giving you the knowledge that they should know and they should be applying to empower you to stand up for your rights to get competent professional treatment. And so you're a generation of parents that's right on the focal point of change. That's why I say I'm a fulcrum. I'm just giving you the knowledge, but you're getting the lever and it's up to you to move it. Licensing board complaints are free. They're going to be stressful to the involved psychologist. They're going to educate the board, but they're also educating the individual psychologist about their failures in this situation. And it's providing a balanced motivation now. If they don't diagnose and interfere with the pathology, then they'll be safe with the pathology, but they'll be in danger from you. If they do identify it, then they're going to be safe with you, but in danger from the pathology. So they're going to have to make a decision as to which danger they wish to face. There's nobody who's safe over here now. Both sides of this are now unsafe. So that's the officer's tent here. I'm creating a situation that's altering the power dynamic, how the symptom confers power. The symptom of their ignorance and incompetence conferred power to the pathology to manipulate the courts. Now it's not conferring power to the pathology. It's going to be equal power, and all psychologists in the family courts are going to have to decide how to protect themselves. And that goes back to the risk management issue. I'm forcing them to reevaluate how they do risk management. Do they just absolve themselves from any responsibilities, which is going to be a dangerous course for them? Or do they actually learn the knowledge and apply the knowledge? And the moment they do, though, they will be admitting that they haven't done that for 40 years. And so there's going to be a big shift here. And I'm not letting them get away with any sort of transition over. No. Once they say, no, Dr. Childress is right, I'm right on down the board. That they're ignorant, they're incompetent, they're unethical, and they've been that way for 40 years, financially exploiting parents, and they're going to have to address me. I would like a organized online debate with either Stahl or Simon or any forensic psychology you want, hosted by a law school, hosted by the legal system. The role of forensic and clinical psychology in the family courts. Dr. Childress will represent for clinical psychology. Get anybody you want to represent for forensic psychology. Okay, let's put it on an online debate. Let's get everything open to where everybody, internationally, everybody can look at what the issues are and make informed decisions. I started out by saying there's a lot of factions within this pathology. There's the flying monkeys, and I've documented them and so I have them as soon as things flip over, we can address the flying monkeys. There's flying, and there's variants of them. I call them the domestic violence monkeys on one side, but there's just variants of these groups who are allies of the pathology because they contain the same damage. They're working through their own damage vicariously, countertransference. But another group of them are what I call the Gardnerian PAS experts. And I'm not going to be addressing them so much directly because they're pretty much irrelevant at this point. And the real focus, the real target is the forensic psychologist and the AFCC and the APA. So it's deeper into that. One of the things for me as I'm working these lines of the universe is that when working with the universe and how it unfolds, you can't get too locked up in your ideas or your path. You have to kind of be more flexible because I may think this is a good path, but the universe says no, it wants this direction. So, one of the features about that is this is moving really a lot faster than I had anticipated. So I'm kind of trying to keep up with some of the changes here. Um, but also it's taken longer than anticipated. It's gone all the way to the end. It's put me in the family courts. I was hoping that it was going to off ramp earlier, because people would, the forensic psychologists would see the danger, but they didn't. And the Gardner people, I call them betrayers, they're the bystanders. Um, and they're kind of by ignoring the change that's coming and ignoring, just flat out ignoring what I'm saying and never addressing it, they delayed the solution by about 5 years, is my estimate. So all the families we lost in the last 5 years, I would put directly at the feet of the Gardner PAS experts. But let me just address a little bit about them here, which is my response when to them, to the group, is that the Gardnerian PAS experts are a fringe group of professionals who disregard and reject the diagnostic guidance of the American Psychiatric Association and the ethical guidance of the American Psychological Association. So in 2013, the DSM fully reviewed parental alienation construct and said no. They continue to reject that decision from the American Psychiatric Association, and they continue to say, no, 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 this really is a new pathology that we've discovered. No, it's not. You had a full and complete review. The answer was no. At this point, you're rejecting the diagnostic guidance of the American Psychiatric Association. So when you're out, these experts are out talking about parental alienation to the general public, in my view, they are spreading medical psychiatric misinformation to the general public to the harm of the consumers. And they can talk about parental alienation if they want, but they are obligated to also talk about shared delusional disorders, child psychological abuse, factitious disorder imposed on another, as well as the work of Dr. Childress with this. Some of the instruments I developed. Got a couple more minutes here, but the forensic psychologists at this, I mean the Gardnerian PAS experts at this point are irrelevant. They're led by Dr. Burnett, and I know I've seen some kind of things pass by that he's trying to get parental alienation into the DSM-5, revision. No, it's not going into the revision. They already said no, full on in 2015. Nothing's changed about Gardner's PAS from the 1980s in the last couple of years, except you're coming up with 5, factor model or whatever. No, nothing's changed. There's no research on it. And it's an awful, awful diagnostic system. That's the fundamental issue. It's just awful. It's the worst diagnostic model for pathology ever, ever, ever. And so that's the issue. But no, it's not getting into DSM-5. But he's a one-trick pony. And they all are, because they want to be experts so badly for their own reasons, their own countertransfer. They want to be an expert in something. But they're not an expert in anything. They're not an expert in attachment. Look at their Vita. They're not an expert in delusional thought disorders. They're not an expert in complex trauma and child abuse, personalities. They're not an expert in anything except Gardner's PAS, a new pathology that they can just simply make up. Now I'm an expert because I can just make up whatever the pathology is, and there's no grounding to anything else out there. The moment we actually switch over to actual real pathologies, they're not an expert in anything. Bill Burnett doesn't know dialectic behavior therapy. How can you be an expert in the pathology if you don't know the treatment for it? He's not an expert in the attachment system. How can you be an expert in attachment pathology if you're not an expert in the attachment system? Meanwhile, Dr. Childress, based on my Vita, I'm an expert in 6 honest to God things. Delusional thought disorders, 12 years at UCLA, being trained to 0.9 diagnostic reliability to the authors of the BPRS. Attachment pathology, early childhood mental health, that's the attachment system. I know 2 additional diagnostic models for early childhood, DC0 to 3, DMIC, and I know 2 early childhood attachment therapies, Watch, Wait, and Wonder, and Circle of Security. I'm an actual attachment expert. Complex trauma and child abuse. Clinical director. I've worked with child abuse. I've personally treated all 4 categories of child abuse and have led the treatment teams that have concluded CPS involvement on child abuse. And this is a child abuse diagnosis, one way or the other. Family systems therapy, worked 20 years in family systems therapy. And so factitious disorder imposed on another out of Children's Hospital. I have that expertise, as well as court-involved family conflict. Worked over here for the last 10 years. So I've got multiple domains of actual expertise, and I've described the pathology using established constructs. So once we start comparing Vitas, and once this clicks over, the Gardner people are just simply not relevant. They're a fringe component. And if you just imagine for a second, with Bill Barnett and Dr. Childress here, we're both a couple old people, and we're both going to be leaving the planet. I'm going to be leaving. Dr. Burnett's going to be leaving. You know, I think he got his medical degree in 1960s or something. You know, like, holy cow, that's a long time. And so what's going to happen to Gardner's PAS movement for the DSM if Bill Burnett leaves it? Who's going to pick up the mantle? No one. No one. It's just going to die. So this is a one-person movement that just is and they know it, and it's just a dead end for all parents, but they don't care. They don't care about solving the pathology. They just want to be experts and recognized as experts. My position is I leave and you've got the knowledge, and so it's the knowledge base. It's not based on experts. That whole model of the expert, like Aristotle, needs to get gone. All psychologists should be applying the same information to reach the same diagnosis and the same treatment. If we have a serious disagreement, one of them is incompetent, and because all doctors looking at the same test data should say, that looks like cancer to me. There shouldn't be one doctor saying, that looks like cancer, and the other one looks at the same data and says, no, it's diabetes. No, that should never happen. So, yeah, with the Gardner PAS people, it's disturbing to me that they are misleading so many parents. It's disturbing that they are spreading medical psychiatric misinformation. It's disturbing that they are not competent in the pathology, attachments, delusional thought disorders, family systems therapy, complex trauma, child development, COHA, and self-psychology. They're just not competent. So to sort of wrap up here in the last couple minutes, it's kind of, I'm not here to bring peace to the world. I'm here to bring a sword. This is going to get really professionally dangerous in the family courts for a while. Hopefully, your parents will make it that way when warranted, when there's unethical practice, when these people are destroying the lives of children. Then the licensing. Don't expect the licensing boards to do anything. They're controlled by the forensic psychologists. What you're doing, though, is you're educating them, and you're creating a space where you are no longer taken for granted, where they have to attend to what your issues are. And I've just posted to my website a set of questions that you can ask any mental health person, these are the questions that you need answered. Because I spoke with a forensic psychologist. Parent got them to talk with me, and they contacted me, and I went right down the issues, and then I sent out a letter confirming what we discussed. And I took those questions out of that letter and posted them up to my website, so all your attorneys, everybody would have that set of diagnostic questions that we need answered. The worst possible thing for these psychologists, if they return a report that I look at and say, we still need a proper risk assessment for possible child abuse. If we still need a risk assessment for possible child abuse, even after their 6 to 9 month assessment, that just shows blatantly the failure of the psychologist. 6 to 9 month assessment. And we still need another assessment for child abuse, which should be a very compact kind of risk assessment, and they drag it out for 7 to 9 months. They're in trouble. And so, and if you give them these questions, they're on record that they've been asked these questions. Now, the other issue, then you look at their vita and say, are they qualified to answer these questions? And so it's a dangerous world for them. And malpractice lawsuits. Now, malpractice lawsuits require parents to hire an attorney to do this. But on malpractice, potentially, I don't know, I'm not an attorney, but you might be able to get damages or something. But that's where I'm emphasizing the negligent failure, because negligence, you Google it, and it's failure to take proper care in doing something. And yeah, they fail to conduct a proper risk assessment for possible child abuse. And there's a one from Cornell that's a nice quote about it. It's basically a failure in a duty, and it's a failure in their duty to protect on 2 counts. And always bring up the 2 counts, because they failed to protect the spouse from spousal abuse as well. And they should. They have obligations. All mental health professionals have obligations, but they're lazy and slothful and ignorant and incompetent. What's I'm anticipating going to happen, though, if we make the situation that dangerous, but with a malpractice lawsuit, all it takes is one of those, a good test case in a malpractice, and you get a Tarasoff ruling that the court says, no, you failed in your duty to protect because you violated these ethical standards, and now the field shifts large and big time. Let me close up here. My cuckoo clocks are going in the background. Let me close up here with what an attachment-based model of parental alienation, ABPA. That's not a new theory. Okay, that's not something out of Dr. Childress. That's Dr. Childress being helpful, because I have the requisite experience in a number of domains. I have identified what the pathology is, the diagnostic issues, and I am helping by giving them a simple little checklist, diagnostic checklist for pathogenic parenting that identifies 3 symptoms. And it's on a checklist thing. Check, check, check. Now, it's got kind of technical words to it, but that's for research purposes. It's going to be a great little measure for research going forward. And maybe I'll talk more about this next time. But, and so it's attachment suppression towards a normal range parent, child rejecting a parent, high protest behavior, either high anger, which is 5 narcissistic personality traits, or high anxious, which is a phobic anxiety, and then a persecutory delusion in the child. And so if those 3 symptoms are present, we got the pathology. It's a shared delusional disorder, factitious disorder imposed on another by a dark triad personality, because that's the only thing that's going to produce those symptoms. So I've made it simple for them, because otherwise they're going to have to do the mental status exam of thought and perception, and they don't know how to do a mental status exam of thought and perception for a delusional thought disorder. So, but they have to, because that's their professional obligation, is to be competent. And that's the Gardner people and the forensic people. They don't realize when I'm doing this stuff, I'm sitting with the mental status exam in my pocket, and I can pull that up and say, that's your requirement. If you don't want to listen to me, then do a mental status exam. And uh, it's up to you. Get the training and do that. And so they'll have to figure out that risk management side of things. But the third page, I want to bring this up, take a few seconds more, is the associated clinical signs. Uh, Dorsey's got some data on this that I've just been seeing. We're going to be looking to kind of work up some descriptive information on this. This is really good. This is Dr. Childress. Okay, so I applied some information, and these are associated clinical signs. They're not diagnostic, but they often show up. There's 12 of them. And the data would indicate that at least 4 of them are always present, not that mix, but at least a frequency of 4 of these are present in all cases, 5 and higher actually, and sometimes 7, 8, 9, even higher than that, but at least 5 are being found in the data surrounding families on these. Some of them are showing up with 100% prevalence. They're there in every case, like, and most of them are in the 90%, 80%. The lowest one is a 30% showing up in the data, and that's texting for other people. So these are really, really good. And you can start collecting these and start checking them off. If you got more than, I'd say, 4 or 5 of these, then that's additional support for the pathology. 3 diagnostic checklists. Is there attachment suppression towards a normal range parent? No, I can't say it. Is there attachment pathology towards a normal range parent? Is there 5 narcissistic personality traits or a specific phobia? Is there a shared persecutory delusion or a persecutory delusion? And then the associated clinical signs. The other measure that I developed was this parenting practices rating scale. This is the one I would suggest that parents start bringing out and asking the mental health person to rate. It defines your parenting into 4 categories, basically. Level 1, level 2 are abusive range, level 3 and level 4 are normal range parenting. And this needs to get documented so we can stop the fighting about whether or not you're causing things. They say you are. They're saying it's a 2-person causality. Okay, document it. Document specifically what my problematic parenting is so we can put it on a treatment plan and fix it. But if it's levels 3 or 4, normal range problematic or normal range healthy, then I can't be causing the pathology. Yeah, the attachment system is a goal-corrected motivational system. It'll produce an insecure attachment with those. So let's get that documented and put out of place. This goes to the diagnostic indicator 1, which is attachment suppression towards a normal range parent. Well, what's a normal range parent? Parenting practices rating scale. So I would start to ask the mental health professional, tell me what my parenting is. In the past, what they would do is the mental health people would say, no, I'm not telling you what your parenting is. I'm not telling you what the child's symptoms are. Wow. Make sure you document that for the licensing board complaint. And right now, Childress is a new kid on the block, but a couple of years from now, I won't be the new kid in the block. So that's sort of a meta overview of things. Not everything. I didn't get to some stuff today, but basically, the Gardnerian PAS people are irrelevant and moving more and more towards irrelevant. Getting something in the DSM-5 is just a pipe dream, and as soon as Dr. Burnett leaves, everything stops with parental alienation. I'm recommending no parent use parental alienation. If you do, you're headed down the rabbit hole of your destruction. There's nothing I can do for you. And so I'm going to say bye-bye to you folks who continue to use that construct and be led off into your destruction by the fringe group of professionals who reject the diagnostic guidance of the American Psychiatric Association and the ethical guidance standard 2.04, 2.01 of the American Psychological Association. The and in for you, the parents, part of my role and task to this point has been to empower you to stand up for your rights to protect your children. It's not for you to intervene and how do I get my children back? No, that you need the mental health people to come in and diagnose the child abuse so we can protect your child. Once we can protect your child, then we can recover your child. But no therapy is going to work. No therapy is going to work as long as the child's being actively abused. If I do therapy for physical abuse and then send the kid home to be beaten with electrical cord, my therapy is not going to be effective. And that's just a fact. So we need an accurate diagnosis to develop an effective treatment plan. Their treatment plans, they haven't solved everything. That's a little piece of the meta that I'll give you too, which is I'm requiring that their treatments be effective. And maybe we'll talk about that next time. The outcome measures, parent-child relationship rating scale. All therapy should have an outcome measure on it. That's just standard of practice. So start asking, what's the outcome measure? What's the outcome measure? Give them the parenting practices rating scale. And say, my ratings on the kid, and the therapy should fix things, and they should be documented to fix things. If it's not, things like these Linda Gottlieb's program, don't do that. But Linda Gottlieb's program, ask her what the outcome measure she uses. Nothing. I heard there's still overcoming barriers, still kind of floating around somewhere. Ask them for the outcome measure. What is the outcome measure that you've used? Document that this has been effective. They have no outcome measures. They don't know how to treat this, and their treatments are all ineffective. And that I'll be exposing that more and more by requiring them to do effective treatment. And they don't know how. They are all incompetent. So we're switching out things and we're creating some risk management kinds of redecisional points for professional psychology. And so in summary here, I'm not leading a movement, and I'm not an expert. I am, but in a lot of stuff. But that's not the model we're using of just one expert. Knowledge belongs to everybody. Everybody should be applying. I'm the floor, not the ceiling. If you don't know as much as me, why not? You're just lazy, or ignorant, one way or the other. And I will embarrass you. And I will make your life very dangerous as a professional if you are ignorant and incompetent and unethical around child abuse. So I anticipate that's going to create some ripples out there. I'm your fulcrum. Find your lever and start leveraging your power of knowledge to get the changes that you want. I'm one, you're many, so I'm attempting to get this information out to as many of you as possible who can use the information. So with that, I'm headed off to my Sunday, and we'll check in with you next week. Bye-bye.